There are pains that no prayer can cure, only teach us to live with. Silence can be our greatest protection or our worst prison, depending on who holds the key. And for almost 50 years, I was the only guardian of my darkest secrets. Good morning, my dear friends. My name is Clara Marie Santos. I'm 83 years old. And today I've finally found the courage to share a story I've kept buried for longer than many of you have been alive. A story about survival, pain, and most importantly, about how I managed to break free when everything seemed lost. I was born in 1941 in a small town called Pleasant Valley in rural Alabama, a place where the sun scorched the dry earth most of the year and where most families survived on what they could scratch from that unforgiving soil. My parents, Joe and Josephine, were farm workers, simple people who woke before dawn and only rested when the night was well advanced. I grew up watching my father's calloused hands and my mother's always tired face, but I never heard a single complaint from either of them. Our house was a wooden shack with a dirt floor, just 3 rooms that sheltered the 7 children my parents had. I was the third, neither the oldest to carry the main responsibility, nor the youngest to receive the pampering. I was just another mouth to feed, another pair of hands to help in the fields when my body could handle the work. Childhood for us ended early. At 8 years old, I was already helping my mother carry water from the well, taking care of my younger siblings, preparing the beans and cornbread that sustained our family. School? Well, that was a luxury few could afford. I attended for only 2 years in a makeshift classroom in teacher Miss Dolores's house, enough to learn to read, write, and do simple math. After that, necessity spoke louder. "Clara needs to help at home," my father would say. "We don't have the luxury of sending children to school when there's so much work to be done." I didn't hold a grudge against him for that. How could I? Joe was a man of his time who had grown up believing that for people like us, work was the only possible path. Studying was for rich folks, for those who could afford the luxury of sitting all day with a book in hand instead of a hoe. But something in me always wanted more. Since I was little, I had a curiosity that my mother said was dangerous for a girl. When I could, I'd grab the story pamphlets that occasionally appeared at the market and read them in secret by lamplight. I dreamed of the places described in those stories, of lives different from mine. The drought of 1953 was the worst our region had seen in decades. The crops died, the few animals we had withered away, and hunger knocked on our door like an unwelcome visitor who refused to leave. I remember the desperate look in my father's eyes, my mother's silent crying at night when she thought no one was listening. And I remember, with painful clarity, the day my youngest brother Joey, only 4 years old, closed his little eyes forever, overcome by hunger and a fever that no herbal tea could break. It was after Joey's burial, in a little coffin too small that my father made himself, that the decision was made. We couldn't continue there. Like so many other Southern families at that time, we would make the long journey north, in search of work and a chance to survive. We sold what little we had, gathered some belongings that fit in 2 canvas bags, and said goodbye to the land that, despite everything, was our home. The journey was long and hard, days and more days in an old truck, cramped with other families who shared the same destiny and the same hope. We went hungry, thirsty, slept in the open. I saw my mother cry silently, looking back at the South that was getting more distant, taking with it the roots we would never recover. Our destination was Tobacco Valley, a town in rural North Carolina that was growing rapidly thanks to tobacco plantations. We arrived during harvest season when farmers hired temporary workers for the harvest. My father got a job in the fields, and soon the whole family, including me at 12 years old, was working from dawn to dusk, picking tobacco leaves that would be sold to the big companies. The work was hard, heavy. The sun burned our skin, already punished by the journey, and the strong smell of tobacco permeated everything: our clothes, our skin, even our dreams. But for the first time in a long time, we had something to eat every day, and we even managed to rent a simple little house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was better than what we had in Alabama. It was during this period that I discovered my talent for cooking. A neighbor, Mrs. Teresa, was a cook in a rich family's house in town, and sometimes she'd call me to help when there were bigger events. She taught me the secrets of Southern recipes, so different from the food I was used to. I learned to make barbecue, stuffed duck, vegetable soup, banana cake, dishes I'd never even heard of before. "You have a good hand for cooking, girl," Mrs. Teresa would say. "Maybe one day you'll get a better job than wearing yourself out in those tobacco fields." Those words planted a seed of hope in me. Maybe, just maybe, there was a different path. My other siblings, one by one, got married, moved away, built their own lives. At 18, only my older brother Antonio and I still lived with our parents. Antonio had gotten a better job as a truck driver and spent weeks traveling. My father, now older and with his health compromised by years of heavy work, could no longer maintain the same productivity in the fields. Debts began to accumulate again. It was then that fate, or would it be misfortune, knocked on our door. Mrs. Teresa came to visit us one afternoon with news that seemed like a blessing. "Mr. Alexander Whitmore is looking for a cook for the big house. The previous one left suddenly, went back to her family in Charlotte. He pays well, Clara, and you'd live there, have your own room, plenty of food. I told him about you, said you cook like a wonder." My heart raced. Mr. Alexander Whitmore was the owner of the largest tobacco plantation in the region, a widowed man, respected, who lived in an imposing mansion on top of a hill, from where they said he could see all his lands. He was richer than we'd ever seen before, a man who had a car, radio, and even one of those television sets that were starting to appear in the homes of the wealthy. My parents were apprehensive at first. I was young, single, and the rumors about Mr. Alexander were contradictory. Some said he was a fair and generous boss, others whispered about his difficult and demanding temperament. But necessity spoke louder. The salary offered was 3 times more than I earned in the tobacco fields, and it still included housing and food. "It's an opportunity, my daughter," my father said, his tired eyes fixed on mine. "But if you don't like it, if they don't treat you well, you come back home. No matter the money, your dignity comes first." Oh, if I had known then how much those words would echo in my mind in the years that followed. If I could go back in time and warn that young Clara, naive and full of hope, about what awaited her in that big house. But life doesn't give us that privilege, does it? And maybe it's better that way. If we knew in advance all the pain we'd have to face, maybe we'd lose the courage to live. Oh, my dear friends who are following me this far. If you can, please leave in the comments where you're watching this old lady from. It warms my heart to know that my voice is reaching far, maybe even places I never had the chance to visit. And if you like my story, please leave a like and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. It helps this 83-year-old lady continue sharing her stories. On an April morning in 1959, I packed my small bundle of clothes and said goodbye to my parents, promising to come back to visit them every Sunday, the only day off I would have. My father hugged me tight as if he sensed something and whispered once more, "Remember, daughter, your dignity is priceless." Mr. Alexander's driver came to pick me up in a shiny car, the kind of car I'd only seen from a distance. The trip to the plantation took about half an hour, enough time for me to observe the tobacco plantations that stretched on all sides, green and lush, so different from the dry lands I'd left behind in Alabama. The big house appeared on the horizon like an apparition, white, imposing, with wide porches and well-tended gardens. I'd never seen such a large and luxurious residence. The driver went around an ornate fountain and stopped in front of a staircase that led to the main entrance. "We're here," he said dryly. "Take your things to the back entrance. Rose, the housekeeper, will show you where your room is." Thus began my life in Mr. Alexander Whitmore's house. In the first few days, I was dazzled by everything: the huge and well-equipped kitchen, the luxurious rooms, the furniture that seemed to come from a movie. Rose, a serious and efficient middle-aged woman, explained my duties. I would be responsible for preparing all meals for Mr. Alexander, keeping the kitchen in order, and occasionally, when he received visitors, preparing more elaborate dinners. "He likes well-made food, but simple," Rose explained. "Nothing extravagant for daily meals. And he's punctual with mealtimes. He doesn't tolerate delays." I met Mr. Alexander on my second day. He entered the kitchen while I was preparing lunch. A tall man, of imposing bearing, graying hair at the temples and piercing blue eyes that contrasted with his tanned skin from someone who spends a lot of time outdoors. He must have been about 50, but kept himself in good shape. "So you're the new cook," he said, looking me up and down with a gaze that, at the time, I interpreted as merely evaluative. "Teresa spoke well of you. I hope you won't disappoint me." "I'll do my best, sir," I replied, lowering my eyes as I'd been taught to do in front of employers. He smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure you will, Clara. I'm sure you will." In those first months, everything seemed to be going well. My salary arrived punctually, and I sent most of it to my parents, keeping only enough for my small needs. Mr. Alexander seemed satisfied with my cooking and occasionally even complimented me, especially when I prepared more elaborate dishes for his guests, local politicians, other farmers, businessmen who came to discuss tobacco crop sales. On Sundays, I visited my parents and told them about my work, about the big house, about how I was saving money. I omitted the small dissatisfactions, the tiredness, the loneliness I felt in that enormous house where, despite all the opulence, human warmth was lacking. I didn't want to worry them, and besides, compared to work in the tobacco fields, my new life seemed like a dream come true. But dreams, as I learned the hard way, can easily turn into nightmares, and mine began to change shape about 6 months after my arrival at the big house. It was subtle at first. Mr. Alexander began appearing in the kitchen more frequently, watching while I worked. He asked questions about my life, my family, my tastes. He seemed genuinely interested, and I, naive and lonely, appreciated the attention, the chance to talk to someone. Then came the small gift, a silk scarf he'd brought from a trip to Richmond, a bottle of perfume, a dress that, according to him, would match my eyes. I accepted the first gifts with bewildered gratitude, without realizing the trap that was closing around me. "You're a very beautiful girl, Clara," he commented one day while I was serving dinner. "Young, fresh as a country flower, different from those city women, all artificial, full of affectation." I blushed, uncomfortable with the comment, but thanked him politely and tried to change the subject. It was that night that he asked, for the first time, that I stay after dinner to keep him company. "It's so lonely to dine alone every night," he said, with a look that tried to seem helpless. "Just a little coffee, a conversation. It wouldn't be asking too much, would it?" And so, without realizing it, I took the first step into the abyss. A little coffee after dinner. A conversation that extended a little longer each night. Compliments that became more personal, more intimate. Looks that lingered longer than they should, that followed me around the house like a shadow. One night, after serving dinner, I was getting ready to leave when Mr. Alexander asked me to sit with him. He'd brought a bottle of wine, something he'd never done before. "Let's celebrate," he said, smiling. "I received news that this year's harvest will be exceptionally good, and I owe much of that to you, Clara." "To me, sir?" I asked, confused. "Of course. A well-fed man works better, thinks better, makes better decisions. Your food gives me strength and encouragement every day." I accepted the wine, just one glass, as I'd never drunk before and didn't know how my body would react. The drink was sweet, pleasant, and soon I felt warmth rising to my face, a lightness in my head that I'd never experienced. It was that night that Mr. Alexander touched my hand for the first time, an apparently casual touch while he poured me more wine. His fingers lingered on mine a second longer than would be appropriate. I pulled my hand away, uncomfortable, but he acted as if nothing had happened. The conversation continued, now directed toward my family. He asked about my parents, about how they were managing since I'd left home. "I'm glad the salary I pay you is helping your family," he commented, his penetrating gaze fixed on mine. "Your father worked in my fields, didn't he? An honorable man, from what I heard. But he's too old for that kind of work now." "Yes, sir," I replied, feeling a tightness in my chest, thinking about my father, increasingly bent under the weight of years and hard work. "You know, Clara," he continued, his voice taking on a more intimate tone, "I can do more for your family, much more. Your father could have lighter work, at the plantation headquarters. Your mother wouldn't have to worry about the rent of that simple little house anymore. I have several properties in town, you know. I can arrange a better place for them, for a symbolic amount. My heart raced. It was a generous offer, almost providential. What my parents needed most at that moment: security, stability, a little comfort in their old age. "Would you do that?" I asked, my voice trembling with hope. "Of course, Clara," he replied, his eyes never leaving mine. "I do this for you. Because you're special. Because you deserve to be rewarded for all your hard work, your loyalty." Then, in a movement that caught me off guard, he approached and placed his hand on my knee. "And because I like you very much, Clara. Very much indeed." That touch left me paralyzed. It wasn't just the surprise, but something deeper, instinctive, an alarm sounding in the back of my mind. I got up abruptly, spilling some wine on the white tablecloth. "It's getting late, sir," I stammered. "I need to tidy up the kitchen before sleeping." He didn't insist, just smiled, that smile that never reached his eyes. "Of course, my dear. Think about what we discussed, about helping your family. Tomorrow we can continue our conversation." I left the dining room with my heart pounding in my chest, my legs shaking. That night, lying in the bed of my small room at the back of the big house, I couldn't sleep. Mr. Alexander's offer spun in my mind, along with the discomfort his touch had caused. There was something wrong, something that went beyond the generosity of an employer toward his employee. But at the same time, the prospect of helping my parents was too tempting to ignore completely. I decided I would be more careful, maintain professional distance, but not immediately reject the offer to help my family. Maybe, I thought naively, I had misinterpreted Mr. Alexander's intentions. Maybe he was just a lonely man seeking companionship, friendship. How wrong I was. How terribly, fatally wrong. The morning after that disturbing conversation with Mr. Alexander, I woke with a weight in my chest that I couldn't explain. The sky dawned gray, loaded with low clouds that promised rain, a portent of what was to come, though I didn't know it yet. I prepared breakfast as I always did, trying to maintain the normal routine, trying to ignore Mr. Alexander's insistent gaze as he drank his coffee and read the newspaper that arrived daily from Raleigh. Occasionally, he would lower the newspaper and observe me over the pages, a small smile on his lips that made me increasingly uncomfortable. "I thought a lot about our conversation yesterday, Clara," he finally said, carefully folding the newspaper. "I spoke with the foreman this morning. Your father can start working in the warehouse from Monday. It's light work, just checking the tools that come in and out, keeping everything organized. The salary will be double what he earns in the fields." My heart leaped. It was an offer that would change my parents' lives. My father, at 58, with his health already compromised by years of hard work, could finally have a less exhausting job, more dignified for his age. "Would you really do that?" I asked, barely able to hide my joy. My father would be so grateful, so relieved. "It's already done," he replied, getting up from the table. He approached me, stopping so close that I could smell his aftershave, an expensive and striking aroma. "And about that house in town, I've also taken care of it. Your parents can move next week. The rent will be symbolic, just to keep up appearances. In practice, consider it a gift from me to you." His last words were said in a lower tone, almost intimate, while his hand touched my face in a gesture that tried to seem paternal, but wasn't. Nothing about that touch was paternal. I instinctively pulled away, murmuring a hurried thanks before turning to the sink, pretending to be busy with the breakfast dishes. He stood there for a moment, as if expecting something more, then sighed almost imperceptibly and left the kitchen. "I'll be out all day," he informed from the door. "I have business in Raleigh, but I'll be back for dinner. Prepare something special tonight, Clara. We have reasons to celebrate." As soon as he left, I let out a sigh of relief that I didn't know I was holding. What was happening? Why did that sudden generosity make me so uncomfortable? And why, despite this discomfort, couldn't I simply refuse? The answer, which I only understood completely much later, was simple and terrible. Power. Mr. Alexander had power over me, over my family, over our future. A power he was beginning to exercise, subtly at first, binding us with ties of gratitude and obligation that would be increasingly difficult to break. The following Sunday, I visited my parents as usual. The news of my father's new job and the house in town had left them in a state of ecstasy. My mother cried with joy when I told her, grabbing my hands between hers, calloused by decades of hard work. "God bless your boss, my daughter," she said, wiping away tears with the corner of her apron. "He's a good man, generous. You're very lucky to work for someone like that." My father, normally a man of few words, also seemed rejuvenated by the news. "I'll work hard to show my gratitude," he stated, his gaze full of renewed dignity. No Whitmore will regret having trusted Joe Santos. Sitting at the simple table in my parents' house, eating the beans with cornbread my mother had prepared, I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. I hadn't told them about the touches, the looks, the insinuations. How could I? They were so happy, so grateful, and besides, what would I say? That I had suspicions, premonitions. There was nothing concrete to report, nothing that would justify tarnishing the image of the man who, in their eyes, was saving our family. I returned to the plantation that night with a knot in my stomach. Something was changing, and not for the better. I could feel it in the air, like the smell of a storm before the first raindrops fall. My parents' move to the new house happened the following week. It was a simple little house, but well built, in the St. Joseph neighborhood, much better than the shack they rented before. It had 2 bedrooms, a small but airy living room, a kitchen with a gas stove, a luxury my mother had never experienced, and even an indoor bathroom with an electric shower. For them, it was like a palace. Mr. Alexander made a point of personally delivering the keys, a gesture that deeply impressed my parents. He presented himself as a simple man despite his wealth, treated my father with respect, praised the food my mother offered, and left leaving an impression of benevolence and humility that didn't match at all the man I was beginning to know in the intimacy of the big house. After that day, things at the plantation accelerated their transformation. Mr. Alexander no longer made any effort to hide his interest in me. The private dinners became a daily routine. The gifts multiplied. Dresses, shoes, simple jewelry that made me feel uncomfortable, but which I didn't know how to refuse without seeming ungrateful. "Dressing you is a pleasure, Clara," he would say, when I tried to refuse some more expensive gift. "You're like a doll, a blank canvas. It's fascinating to see how you transform with the right things." His words made me increasingly uneasy. That wasn't how you talked about a person, about a human being with their own will. It was as if I were an object, a property, something to be molded according to his desires. The touches also became more frequent, more daring. A hand on my waist while I served dinner, fingers that brushed my neck when he passed behind me. A kiss on the cheek that lasted too long, that came dangerously close to my lips. With each new advance, I tried to retreat, create distance, establish boundaries. But Mr. Alexander had a special way of making me feel guilty for rejecting his demonstrations of affection, as he called them. "After everything I've done for you, for your family, is this how you thank me?" he would ask, his face taking on a hurt expression that at the time I still believed was genuine. "I thought we were closer, Clara. I thought we had a special connection." I would apologize, confused, torn between the discomfort I felt and the fear of displeasing the man who held our lives in his hands, because that's what Mr. Alexander had become. Not just my employer, but my family's benefactor, the man on whom we depended for practically everything. The situation reached a critical point on a November night in 1959. It was raining hard, one of those summer storms that turn day into night in a matter of minutes. Mr. Alexander had returned from a trip to Richmond where he'd gone to negotiate the tobacco crop sale. He returned in good spirits, bringing gifts for everyone in the house: chocolate for Rose, the housekeeper, a bottle of whiskey for the driver, and for me, a set of silk lingerie so inappropriate that I felt my face catch fire when I opened the package. "Don't you like it?" he asked, observing my reaction. "It's the best in Richmond, imported from France. It's very beautiful," I replied, avoiding his eyes, quickly closing the box. "But I can't accept it. It wouldn't be appropriate." His face changed instantly. The smile disappeared, replaced by a hard expression I'd never seen before. "It wouldn't be appropriate," he repeated, his voice now icy. "And what would be appropriate, Clara? Accepting everything I've done for you and your family, but denying me any demonstration of gratitude? I am grateful, sir, I hurried to say, my heart racing. Very grateful. I work hard every day to show that. My father, too. Work, he spat the word as if it were an insult. I pay for your work, Clara. What I've done for your family goes far beyond that. It's personal. It's because I care about you, because I have feelings for you. You didn't think it was free, did you? Those words fell on me like a bucket of cold water. So that was it. It had never been generosity, concern, kindness. It had been calculation, investment, an elaborate way of creating a debt that I would, eventually, have to pay. I don't know what you expect from me, I said, my voice almost a whisper. He approached, his blue eyes now cold as ice. Yes, you do, Clara. You always knew. You just played innocent, accepting everything I offered without giving anything in return. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks, pulling me against his body. I tried to pull away, pushing his chest, but he was much stronger. His lips found mine in a forced, violent kiss that had nothing of affection or true desire. It was possession, domination, a raw demonstration of power. When I finally managed to pull away, panting and trembling, he smiled. Not the affable smile he showed in public, but something predatory, something that made my blood freeze in my veins. You're mine, Clara, he said, his voice low, dangerous. I bought you the moment you accepted the first gift, the first help for your family. Everything has a price in this life. It's time to start paying yours. I ran to my room, locking the door, my heart beating so hard I thought it would explode in my chest. I spent the night awake, sitting on the bed with my back against the wall, expecting at any moment to hear footsteps in the hallway, to see the doorknob turn. But Mr. Alexander didn't come that night. He was just beginning his game. His method of psychological torture that I would discover soon was calculated to break me gradually, to make me accept my fate as inevitable. The next morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. He drank his coffee calmly, read his newspaper, even complimented the toast I'd prepared. But there was something different in his eyes when he looked at me. A certainty, an expectation, like a predator who knows his prey has nowhere to run. My first thought was to leave there immediately. Go back to my parents' house, tell them everything, find another job. But then I remembered their joy with the new house, my father's relief with the less heavy work, the comfort they finally had after a lifetime of struggle and deprivation. How could I take that away from them? And where would we go? Back to the shack on the outskirts? Back to hunger, uncertainty? And, more importantly, would Mr. Alexander allow it? Would he let us simply leave his orbit, after everything he had invested in us? Fear began to establish itself in me, not just fear of what he could do to me, but of what he could do to my family if I defied him. I decided I would buy time, think calmly, find a way out that wouldn't throw my parents back into misery. Maybe I could save enough money to support us for a few months while we looked for another place, other jobs. Maybe I could talk to Mr. Alexander, make him understand that what he wanted from me was wrong, immoral. How foolish I was. As if a man like him, used to having everything he desired, would be stopped by concepts like morality or consent. 3 nights after that first forced kiss, Mr. Alexander came home late. He'd spent the day in town, in meetings with other farmers. When he entered the kitchen where I was finishing cleaning after dinner, which he hadn't eaten, I could smell the alcohol emanating from him. "Your father is a good worker," he said, without preamble, leaning against the doorframe. "Everyone at the warehouse speaks well of him. It would be a shame if he had to go back to the fields. His age, the back problem. He wouldn't last long." The threat was clear, even in its veiled form. I felt a chill run down my spine, my hands suddenly cold and damp. "Why would you do that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "My father did nothing wrong." Mr. Alexander approached, his steps slightly unsteady from the drink. "It's not about your father, Clara. It's about you, about us, about what we could have together if you'd stop this pretense of innocence." He was so close now that I could feel his hot breath, a mixture of expensive whiskey and cigar. His hand found my waist, pulling me against him. "Please, no," I whispered, tears already forming in my eyes. Please, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. That night, on the cold kitchen floor of the big house, I lost much more than my innocence. I lost my dignity, my autonomy, my belief that the world could be a fair place. When it was all over, when Mr. Alexander finally got up, adjusted his clothes and left the kitchen without saying a word, I lay there, unable to move, to cry, to feel anything but a deep and cold emptiness. Eventually, I managed to drag myself to my room. I took the longest and hottest shower of my life, scrubbing my skin until it was red, as if I could clean not just the physical marks, but the stain I felt on my soul. I lay on the bed, curled up like a child, and finally let the tears come. Silent, bitter, tears of anger as much as pain. That night I decided I would run away, no matter how, no matter where. Anywhere would be better than that golden hell my life had become. But the next morning, when I was about to put my few clothes in a bundle and leave through the back door, Rose, the housekeeper, entered my room without knocking. Her normally impassive face showed an expression I'd never seen before, something between pity and complicity. "You're not the first," she said simply, her eyes avoiding mine. "And you won't be the last if you run." I stood paralyzed, the bundle half-packed in my hands. "What are you talking about?" Rose sighed, finally looking into my eyes. "The others who came before you. Young women like you, alone, vulnerable. Some ran away. Others—" She paused, as if carefully choosing her next words. "Others tried to confront him, report him. None succeeded. He has friends everywhere, in the police, at the courthouse, at City Hall, and he always ends up finding those who run." My blood froze in my veins. What happened to them? Some simply disappeared. Others came back, more broken than when they left. She shrugged, a gesture that tried to seem indifferent, but couldn't completely hide the pain. One of them was my niece. That's why I came to work here, to try to protect her. I couldn't. I sat on the bed, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. And what should I do? Stay here and accept this? Rose approached, placing a wrinkled hand over mine. It was the first time she'd touched me in all those months, the first demonstration of anything beyond professional efficiency. "Survive," she said, her voice low but firm. "Do whatever it takes to survive. And wait. Eventually he'll get tired. Find another. They always get tired, eventually." Her eyes, which had always seemed cold and distant to me, were now full of an ancient, deep sadness. And I understood, with a shock that left me breathless, that she knew what she was talking about, not just from observation, but from personal experience. "How long?" I asked, my voice almost inaudible. "It depends. A few months, maybe a year. It depends on how much you entertain him, how much you resist. The more you fight, the longer it takes for him to get tired." She moved away, returning to her formal posture, as if that brief moment of human connection had never happened. "He went to town. He'll only be back at night. You have time to recover, to decide what you're going to do." After Rose left, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, her words echoing in my mind. Survive. Do whatever it takes to survive. Wait, was that my destiny? Was that the only option for someone like me? A poor young woman without formal education, without connections, without power. Accept abuse, humiliation, violation of my most basic dignity, and simply wait for it to pass? I thought about my parents, about how devastated they would be if they knew the price I was paying for their comfort, their security. I thought about running far away, starting over in another city, another state. But how would I survive? And what would happen to my family when Mr. Alexander discovered my escape? That day, I made the most difficult decision of my life up to that point. I wouldn't run. I wouldn't fight openly. I would do exactly what Rose had advised. Survive. I would endure one day at a time, protect my family as I could, and wait for an opportunity, an exit I couldn't yet see. With that decision, something died inside me. The young dreamer, hopeful, who had arrived at the big house believing in a better future, disappeared. In her place, a harder, colder, more calculating woman was born. A woman who would do whatever was necessary to protect what remained of her dignity, her humanity. In the months that followed, A terrible routine was established at the big house. During the day, I was the efficient, discreet, almost invisible cook. At night, I became Mr. Alexander's private property, an object for his pleasure, his domination, his assertion of power. He was never gentle, never showed any consideration for my feelings or comfort. What happened between us had nothing of passion, of mutual desire. It was pure demonstration of possession, of control, and he made sure to remind me constantly that I was there by choice, the choice to protect my family, to maintain the comfort and security he had provided. "You could leave at any time, Clara," he would say, a cruel smile on his lips. "But we know what would happen to your parents, don't we? That comfortable little house, your father's light job, it would all disappear in the blink of an eye." On Sundays, I continued visiting my parents. I smiled, told invented stories about my work, praised the new house, asked about their health. Inside, I was falling apart. The guilt for what I was allowing to happen, the shame I felt, the constant sensation of being dirty, marked, corrupted. All of this consumed me slowly, like an invisible cancer. My mother, with that intuition that only mothers possess, noticed something was wrong. "You're different, my daughter," she would say, studying my face with concern. "Thinner, paler. You have dark circles. Are you sick?" "Just tired, Mom," I would reply, avoiding her eyes. "A lot of work at the big house. Nothing to worry about." But the concern didn't leave her gaze, and I knew she didn't entirely believe my words. However, she never insisted, never pressed. Maybe she feared hearing the truth. Maybe she knew, deep down, what was happening, but chose not to see in order to preserve the fragile stability we had achieved. The months turned into a year. A year of humiliation, of pain, of daily survival that drained my strength, my will to live. The only thing that kept me functioning was hope. Tenuous, almost imperceptible, but still present, that Mr. Alexander would eventually tire of me, as Rose had predicted. And then, when I was almost giving up on that hope, something happened. Something that would completely change the course of my life, that would open a door where before there were only walls. On a Sunday morning in May 1961, I was preparing breakfast when I heard the sound of a car arriving. We weren't expecting visitors, and Mr. Alexander rarely received anyone so early. Curious, I peeked through the kitchen window. A young man was getting out of a new car, a model I'd never seen before. He was tall, thin, with dark hair like Mr. Alexander's, but there was a softness in his face, a gentleness in his gestures that contrasted strongly with the hardness of my tormentor. "Who is it?" I asked Rose, who was also observing the arrival with interest. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, something between surprise and, perhaps, a glimmer of hope. "It's Thomas, Mr. Alexander's son. He's back from the capital." Mr. Alexander's son. Those words provoked in me a strange mixture of curiosity and apprehension. I'd never heard of him before, although I'd been at the house for almost 2 years. Mr. Alexander never mentioned his son. There were no photographs of him in the house, no indication of his existence until that moment. "He studies in the capital," Rose continued, keeping her voice low as if she feared being heard. "Medicine. Mr. Alexander wanted him to follow the family business, but the boy always had other plans. They don't get along." I watched through the window as Mr. Alexander came out to receive his son. Even from a distance, I could perceive the tension in the encounter, the quick and formal embrace, the smiles that didn't reach their eyes, the way they maintained a careful distance from each other, like two strangers trying to be cordial. I quickly returned to my tasks, not wanting to be caught spying. I prepared breakfast for 2, adding more fruit and bread to the table, and stayed discreetly in the kitchen, trying to hear the conversation happening in the dining room. The voices were muffled, but occasionally I could distinguish words, loose phrases. Apparently Thomas had come to spend winter break at the plantation. He was in his 3rd year of medicine at the State University in Richmond. Mr. Alexander didn't seem particularly happy with the visit, but maintained an appearance of civility. While serving more coffee, I looked quickly at Thomas. Up close, he seemed even more different from his father. He had the same blue eyes, but his were gentle, observant. When he saw me, he smiled politely and thanked me for the coffee. It was the first genuine smile I'd received in that house in a long time. "This is Clara, my cook," Mr. Alexander introduced casually, as if I were just another piece of furniture in the house. "She's been with us for some time." Thomas studied me for a moment longer than would be necessary, as if trying to see something beyond the appearance of the cook. I felt uncomfortable under his gaze, not because it was invasive or malicious, but because there was a perception in it that scared me, as if he could see the invisible marks his father had left on me. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Clara," he said, his voice calm, polite, so different from his father's authoritative tone. I murmured a response and left quickly, my heart beating hard in my chest. There was something about that young man, a decency, a humanity, that awakened in me emotions I had buried deep to survive: hope, dignity, the memory of who I had been before becoming Mr. Alexander's property. In the days that followed, the big house routine subtly changed with Thomas's presence. Mr. Alexander changed his behavior, not just with me, but with all the employees. It was as if his son's presence forced him to wear a mask of civility, to play the role of the fair and reasonable boss that everyone in town believed him to be. At night, he no longer came to my room. He didn't corner me in the kitchen when everyone had already retired. He maintained a formal, almost cold distance, as if I really were just the cook, nothing more. This sudden change brought me immense relief, but also apprehension. I knew it was temporary, that as soon as Thomas left, Mr. Alexander would return to being the monster I knew so well. Still, each day without his touches, without his violence, was like an unexpected gift, a moment to breathe before returning to drown. Thomas, meanwhile, showed increasing curiosity about the house, the employees, the plantation dynamics. He asked questions, observed, seemed always attentive to details that others would ignore. Sometimes I caught him watching me with a thoughtful, almost worried expression. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after his arrival, Thomas entered the kitchen while I was preparing dinner. I was alone. Rose had gone to town to get supplies, and Mr. Alexander was in the plantations, supervising the harvest. "Can I talk to you for a moment, Clara?" he asked, sitting at the kitchen table without waiting for an answer. I felt a chill in my stomach. What did he want? Had he noticed something? Had Mr. Alexander spoken to him about me? "Of course, sir," I replied automatically, keeping my eyes down, as I'd learned to do. "Please call me Thomas," he said, with a slight smile. "I'm not sir to anyone, much less you." That phrase, said so casually, caught me off guard. It was the complete opposite of Mr. Alexander's mentality, who saw the whole world, especially the people who worked for him, as his property. "As you wish, Thomas," I replied, still suspicious, still defensive. He observed me for a moment, his blue eyes studying my face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "How long have you been working for my father, Clara?" "Almost 2 years." "And how does he treat you?" The direct question left me momentarily speechless. What should I answer? The truth was out of the question. Mr. Alexander would never allow his image to be tarnished, especially in front of his son. "He's a good boss," I replied mechanically, the words coming out as if they'd been rehearsed, which, in a way, they had been. It was what I told everyone who asked, the safe, expected answer. Thomas tilted his head slightly, as if he could hear the lie in my words. "I know my father can be difficult, demanding, sometimes cruel." My heart raced. Where was he going with this conversation? Was it a trap? A test to see if I would speak badly of Mr. Alexander? "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, turning to the stove, pretending to be busy with the pots. "Your father has always been proper with me." I heard Thomas sigh behind me. "Clara, please, look at me." Something in his voice, a plea, a sincerity I wasn't used to hearing, made me turn. He was standing now, a few steps away, his eyes full of a compassion that made my throat tighten. "I'm not here to judge you or to create problems," he said, his voice low, urgent. "I'm here because I noticed how you change when my father enters the room. The fear in your eyes, the way your body shrinks as if expecting a blow. I know these signs. I've seen them before." I stood paralyzed, unable to respond. It was as if an abyss had opened under my feet. For so long I had struggled to hide, to pretend, to survive without letting anyone see the truth. And now, this stranger, this young man I barely knew, was looking directly at the scars I thought were invisible. "I don't know what you want from me," I finally managed to say, my voice little more than a whisper. "I want to help," he replied simply, "if you'll let me." Those words, so simple, so direct, were like a small crack in a dam. Suddenly, all the emotions I had repressed for almost 2 years, fear, anger, shame, despair, threatened to overflow. I felt tears forming, my vision blurring. "Nobody can help me," I said, my voice choked. "Nobody." Thomas took a step forward, as if he were going to touch me, console me, but stopped, perhaps realizing that any physical contact would be unbearable for me at that moment. "That's not true," he said, with a conviction that surprised me. "There's always a way out, Clara. Always. Even when we can't see it." The sound of a car arriving interrupted our conversation. Mr. Alexander was back. I quickly dried my tears with the back of my hands, returning to the stove, trying to regain my composure. "Think about what I said," Thomas murmured, already heading for the door. "You're not alone." He left before his father entered, and I stood there, stirring a pot that didn't need stirring, my heart beating so hard I was sure Mr. Alexander would hear it when he entered the kitchen. But he didn't enter. I heard their voices on the porch, father and son talking, discussing something I couldn't distinguish. Then, silence. And then, Mr. Alexander's footsteps moving away toward his office. That night, I barely slept. Thomas's words echoed in my mind. "You're not alone." After so long feeling exactly that, completely alone, isolated, trapped in an impossible situation, the idea that someone could see me, understand me, want to help me, was both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because, for the first time in almost 2 years, I felt a glimmer of real hope. Terrifying because I knew how dangerous Mr. Alexander could be when contradicted, when challenged. If he discovered that his son was trying to help his property escape, the consequences would be terrible, not just for me, but for Thomas too. The next day, I avoided Thomas as much as possible. I kept myself busy in the kitchen, only leaving when absolutely necessary, responding to his attempts at conversation with polite but distant monosyllables. Part of me desperately wanted to believe him, trust him, accept his help. But another part, the part that had learned to survive by being cautious, suspicious, saw traps everywhere. What if it was a trick by Mr. Alexander? A way to test my loyalty, to see if I would betray his trust, reveal his dirty secrets? Or worse, what if Thomas was sincere, but unable to really help me? What if his intervention only made my situation worse, making Mr. Alexander even more controlling, more violent? 3 days passed in this standoff, with Thomas trying to approach and me maintaining distance. On the 4th day, he intercepted me on the way to the small room where we kept the supplies, away from the eyes and ears of anyone else in the house. "Clara, please," he said, his voice low but urgent. "I know you're scared. I know you have no reason to trust me. But I don't have much time. I go back to Richmond in 2 weeks. If you want my help, you need to let me help you now." I looked at him, studying his face for any sign of falseness, of deception. I only found genuine concern, a determination that reminded me, strangely, of myself before all this ordeal, when I still believed I could change my destiny, build something better for me and my family. "How?" I finally asked, my voice almost inaudible. "How could you help me? Your father is powerful. He has friends everywhere, and my family depends on him, on his money, on the house he lent us." Thomas nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "We need proof," he said thoughtfully. "Something my father can't deny, something that gives you bargaining power." "Proof?" I repeated, confused. "Of the abuse," he said directly without beating around the bush. "Of what he does to you. Of how he threatens you, how he uses your family to keep you submissive." I felt my face burn with shame. So he knew, really knew, not just suspected. "How?" "I grew up in this house, Clara," he replied, his voice now laden with an ancient sadness. "It wasn't the first time my father took advantage of someone vulnerable. My own mother." He stopped, as if the words were too painful to be said. Let's just say I know how to recognize the signs. The revelation shocked me. Somehow, I'd never thought of Thomas's mother, Mr. Alexander's wife, as someone who might also have suffered at his hands. In my mind, she had been a society lady, protected by her status, her position. She too? I asked, my voice trembling. My mother didn't die of pneumonia, as everyone believes, Thomas said, his eyes now hard, cold. She killed herself. She couldn't take it anymore. And I wasn't here to help her. I was at school, too far away to notice what was happening, to do something about it. The pain in his voice was palpable, raw, and I understood then that his offer of help wasn't just for me. It was also a form of redemption, of doing for me what he hadn't been able to do for his own mother. I have a plan, he continued, after a moment of heavy silence. It's not perfect, and it involves risks, but it can work if we're lucky. If you're brave. Brave. No one had called me that before. In fact, after almost 2 years accepting Mr. Alexander's abuse, I felt everything but brave. I felt weak, cowardly, a person who had sold her dignity to protect her family. What should I do? I asked, surprised by the sudden firmness in my own voice. Thomas smiled for the first time since we'd started that conversation. A sad smile, but determined. We need to catch my father in the act. Record what he does, what he says. Create evidence he can't deny, can't turn into his word against yours. How? He took from his pocket a small object I'd never seen before. Not much bigger than a matchbox, with buttons and a small lens. This is a portable recorder, he explained, the most modern available. It can record up to 2 hours of audio on a tape. We'll hide it in your room or wherever, where He couldn't finish the sentence, and I felt my face burn again with shame. But at the same time, a spark of hope lit in my chest. Evidence. Something concrete, irrefutable, something that could free me. And then? I asked, trying to imagine the next step. What would we do with that recording? We'd confront my father, Thomas replied, his eyes now shining with fierce determination. I would confront him, give him 2 options. Either he frees you completely with substantial compensation that allows you and your family to start over somewhere else, or I take the recording to the police, to the press, to all his precious friends in high society. The idea made me dizzy. It was bold, dangerous, almost unthinkable. Confront Mr. Alexander, threaten him, force him to give in. It was like challenging a cruel, omnipotent God. He'd never accept, I said, my voice trembling. He'd kill us both first. Thomas shook his head, a strange certainty in his eyes. You don't know my father like I know him. He cares about only 2 things in this world, power and reputation, and the second is even more important than the first. He'd rather lose half his fortune than be publicly exposed as the monster he really is. I thought about Thomas's words, about the plan he proposed. It was risky, yes. But for the first time in almost 2 years, I saw a real possibility of escape, of liberation. A chance to recover not just my freedom, but my dignity. Let's do it, I said finally. The decision crystallized in my mind. Tell me exactly what I need to do. In the days that followed, Thomas and I met secretly, planning every detail of our strategy. We chose the place to hide the recorder, behind a small cabinet in my room, where Mr. Alexander used to visit me almost every night before his son's arrival. Thomas taught me how to operate the device, how to check if it was working properly, how to change the tape when necessary. The plan was simple. As soon as Mr. Alexander returned to his usual routine, which would inevitably happen when he believed Thomas didn't suspect anything, we would activate the recorder and capture his words, his threats, clear evidence of the abuse I suffered at his hands. But for the plan to work, it was necessary for Mr. Alexander to come back to seek me, to treat me as his property, and for that, Thomas needed to feign disinterest, distance himself, give his father the false security that he suspected nothing. Thus began a strange theater at the big house. During the day, Thomas treated me with the same polite indifference he showed to the other employees. He didn't seek private conversations, didn't show special concern. He spent most of his time out, exploring the plantation, visiting friends in town, giving Mr. Alexander the impression that he was just fulfilling his filial obligation by spending the holidays at the family property. The strategy worked. Slowly, Mr. Alexander relaxed his vigilance. His looks in my direction returned to carrying that sick possessiveness I knew so well. His comments, initially discreet, became more daring, more explicit when we were alone. And then, on a night when Thomas had gone out to dinner in town, purposely to give his father the opportunity he was clearly waiting for, Mr. Alexander came to my room. Before he arrived, I activated the recorder as Thomas had taught me. I hid it carefully, making sure it would capture everything, every word, every sound. And then I waited, my heart beating so hard I feared he might hear it. When the door opened, revealing Mr. Alexander with that predatory smile I'd learned to fear, I forced myself to remain calm. I needed to let him talk. I needed to provoke the confessions, the threats that would serve as our evidence. "Did you miss me, Clara?" he asked, closing the door behind him. "These weeks without being able to touch you have been frustrating." "Your son," I began, feigning nervousness, which wasn't difficult considering the situation. "My son isn't here," he cut me off, approaching. "And even if he were, what could he do? This is my house, my plantation. You're mine." I swallowed hard, real fear mixing with the determination to follow through with the plan. "I'm not anyone's property," I said, the words coming out firmer than I expected. His face changed instantly, the mask of civility falling to reveal the cold rage I knew so well. "No?" he asked, grabbing my arm hard enough to leave marks. "Who pays for everything you and your family have? Who gave your father a decent job when he was no longer good for heavy work? Who put a decent roof over your mother's head?" "That doesn't give you the right to treat me like this," I replied, part of me shocked by my own audacity, another part determined to make him reveal his true nature to the hidden recorder. He laughed, a cold sound, without humor. "Right? I don't need right, Clara. I have power. That's all that matters in this world. Power to take what I want, to do what I want, and now what I want is you." What followed was horrible, painful, humiliating. But unlike the previous times, when I just passively endured, this time there was a fire inside me, the certainty that every word, every cruel act was being recorded, becoming the weapon that would eventually free me. When it was finally over, when Mr. Alexander left my room with that sick satisfaction in his eyes, I allowed myself to cry, not from despair, but from relief. We had done it. We had the evidence we needed. The next morning, with swollen eyes from tears but a strangely light heart, I found a way to pass the tape to Thomas without arousing suspicion. He listened to it alone, in his room, and when we met briefly in the kitchen, his eyes were different. There was a contained fury in them, a determination that almost scared me. "Tonight," he whispered, when he was sure no one could hear us, "when my father comes back from town, I'll be in his office. Come when I call." I spent the day in a state of nerves, barely able to perform my usual tasks. What would happen that night? Would Mr. Alexander really give in to his son's blackmail? Or would he react with violence, destroying our only chance of liberation? The hours dragged with torturous slowness. When I finally heard Mr. Alexander's car arriving, my heart raced. Minutes later, Rose came to the kitchen with the message. "Young Thomas asks that you go to the office. He and the boss want to talk to you." With trembling legs, I made my way to the office, a part of the house I rarely visited, the private sanctuary where Mr. Alexander conducted his business, made his decisions, exercised his power. When I entered, I found a tense scene. Thomas standing by the window, arms crossed, his face a mask of determination. Mr. Alexander sitting behind the large mahogany desk, his face pale, his eyes burning with a contained rage I'd never seen before. "Come in, Clara," Thomas said, his voice surprisingly calm. "And close the door." I obeyed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air in the office was heavy, loaded with tension, like in the moments before a great storm. "My son has an interesting story to tell," Mr. Alexander said, his voice deceptively soft. "Something about you and me, about serious accusations. About a supposed recording." I looked at Thomas, seeking guidance, strength. He nodded slightly, encouraging me to move forward. "They're not accusations, they're facts," I replied, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "Facts that are recorded, that anyone can hear." Mr. Alexander's face contorted in an expression of barely contained fury. For a terrible moment, I thought he was going to jump on me, assault me right there in front of his son. But then, slowly, the mask of control returned. "And what do you two expect to achieve with this blackmail?" he asked, his eyes moving from son to me and back. "It's not blackmail, Father," Thomas replied, taking a step forward. "It's justice, or at least the closest thing to it we can achieve without completely destroying our family name." "Justice," Mr. Alexander repeated, the word sounding like an obscenity on his lips. "And what exactly would justice be in this case?" Thomas looked at me, as if giving me the word, the right to establish the terms of my own liberation. I felt a knot in my throat, a mixture of fear and determination. "I want to leave here," I said, each word deliberate, clear. "I want to start over somewhere else, far from here, far from you. And I want my parents to be safe, to have a way to support themselves without depending on you." Mr. Alexander laughed, a harsh sound, without humor. "And why would I agree to this? What would stop me from simply denying everything, from saying you're just a resentful employee trying to extort money from me?" It was then that Thomas placed the small recorder on the desk, between him and his father. "Because I have 3 copies of this tape. One is in a safe place, with instructions to be delivered to the police if anything happens to me or Clara. Another is with a lawyer friend in Richmond, sealed, to be opened only under specific circumstances." Mr. Alexander's face paled even more. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw fear in his eyes. Not just anger, not just frustration, but genuine fear. "You wouldn't do that," he said. But his voice had lost its usual certainty. "You'd destroy the family name, your own name." "I'd rather live without a name than live knowing I allowed you to continue abusing innocent people," Thomas replied, a fierce conviction in his voice. "I couldn't save my mother, but I can save Clara. And I will, whatever it costs." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with possibilities. I saw the exact moment when Mr. Alexander understood he was cornered, that he had no choice but to give in. I saw the defeat in his eyes, quickly replaced by cold calculation, not of how to win, but of how to lose the least possible. "How much?" he finally asked, his voice controlled, cold. "How much to end this once and for all? How much?" Mr. Alexander's question hung in the office air, raw in its simplicity, as if my dignity, my suffering, could be calculated in dollars, transformed into a simple commercial transaction. Thomas and I had discussed this moment, anticipated what we would ask for if we managed to get this far. But now, face to face with my tormentor, words escaped me. "It's not just money," Thomas said, noticing my hesitation. "It's complete freedom. Clara leaves here today with all her things. You never look for her again, never interfere in her life or her family's life." Mr. Alexander gave a cold smile, without humor. Touching. "But let's get back to the practical question. How much?" I took a deep breath, finding courage I didn't know I had. "Enough to buy a house for my parents. A real house, not rented by you. And enough for me to start over somewhere else, far from here. Maybe open a small business." He studied me with those cold eyes I knew so well, calculating, evaluating. "Numbers, Clara. Give me numbers." $10,000, I said, my voice firm, surprising myself. It was an enormous sum for someone like me, but an insignificant fraction of the Whitmore fortune. Mr. Alexander laughed, a harsh sound that made me shudder. 10,000? For all this drama? I thought you'd ask for much more." "I don't want your money," I replied, feeling indignation grow inside me. "I want my life back. The money is just to guarantee I never need anything from you again." He leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the mahogany desk. For a moment, he seemed almost impressed. "You know, Clara, I always knew there was something different about you. A strength that the others didn't have." His words disgusted me, as if my resistance, my determination to survive, had been just another interesting aspect for him, another thing to break, to possess. 20,000, he said suddenly. $20,000, a house in your parents' name, and you disappear from my life forever. The tapes will be destroyed and we'll never talk about this again. I looked at Thomas, uncertain. It was more than we'd asked for, more than we'd expected. Why was Mr. Alexander being generous? As if reading my mind, he continued, "Consider it an investment in my peaceful future, and in your permanent discretion." I understood then. It wasn't generosity, it was insurance. He was paying to ensure his secret remained buried, that his reputation remained intact. $20,000, a fortune for me, but a small price for him to preserve his precious name. $30,000, Thomas said, his voice firm, and a signed document guaranteeing that my father will never look for Clara or her family again, under any pretext. Mr. Alexander's eyes narrowed dangerously, fixing on his son with a mixture of anger and reluctant respect. "You were always too smart for your own good, boy." "No, father," Thomas replied, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I just learned to recognize evil when I see it." For a long moment, father and son stared at each other in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Mr. Alexander sighed, an expression of momentary defeat crossing his face before being replaced by the usual mask of control. "Very well, 30,000, and the document, but I want all the tapes." "All but one," Thomas replied immediately, "which will remain in a safe place as guarantee that the agreement will be respected." Mr. Alexander hesitated, clearly displeased with this condition, but finally nodded. "All right. But if one day, a single day, I learn that this story was mentioned to any person—" "It won't be," I interrupted, my voice firmer than it had ever been in his presence. "Believe me, I want to forget all this as much as you do." He studied me for a moment, something strange in his gaze, not remorse, he was incapable of that, but perhaps a grudging admiration for the woman who had managed finally to escape his clutches. "The papers will be ready tomorrow," he said, turning to his son. "The money will be transferred to an account in her name. The house will be deeded to the parents, and after that, I never want to hear Clara's name in my presence again." That night, for the first time in almost 2 years, I slept without fear. Not in the small room at the back of the big house, but in a hotel in town, paid for by Thomas to ensure my safety until everything was resolved. Lying in the simple but clean bed, looking at the unfamiliar ceiling, I tried to process what had happened, what was about to happen. I was free, or would be, very soon. Free from fear, from humiliation, from Mr. Alexander's repulsive touch. Free to rebuild my life, to rediscover who I was beyond the survivor, the victim. The idea was both exhilarating and terrifying. For so long I had lived one day at a time, thinking only of surviving until the next dawn. Now suddenly, I had an open future ahead of me, possibilities I hadn't dared imagine before. The next day, Thomas found me at the hotel, bringing with him a folder of documents. His eyes were tired, as if he hadn't slept, but there was a satisfaction on his face that spoke of battles won. "It's all here," he said, opening the folder on the small table in the room. "The contract my father signed, guaranteeing he'll never look for you or your family again. The deed to the house, already transferred to your parents' names, and the bank account documents where the money was deposited in your name. $30,000 as agreed." I looked at the papers, feeling a mixture of disbelief and relief. It was real. It had happened. I was free. How did he react? I asked, curious about Mr. Alexander's state of mind after our confrontation. Thomas gave a small, tired smile. As expected. Anger, then cold acceptance. My father is, above all, a practical man. He knows when he's cornered, when it's time to retreat and cut losses. I nodded, still barely believing we had succeeded. That I was really free from that man, from that place. "What happens now?" I asked, sudden anxiety dominating me. "Where do I go? What do I do?" Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, his gentle eyes fixed on mine. "That depends entirely on you, Clara. For the first time in a long time, your future is in your own hands." His words, though comforting, also scared me. For almost 2 years, all my choices had been taken from me. Every aspect of my life had been controlled, determined by Mr. Alexander. The sudden freedom was almost as disorienting as the captivity had been. I don't know where to start, I admitted, suddenly feeling very young, very inexperienced for the world that was opening before me. Start with the basics, Thomas suggested. Talk to your parents. Explain what you can, what you feel comfortable sharing. Then think about where you'd like to go, what you'd like to do. I thought about my parents, about how they would react to the news that I was leaving my job at the big house, that we had our own house, money in the bank. How would I explain all this without revealing the sordid truth behind these gifts? You don't have to tell them everything, Thomas said, as if reading my thoughts. Sometimes, the complete truth causes more pain than it heals. Just say there was an agreement, that Mr. Alexander recognized your hard work with generous compensation. It was a half-truth that could work. My parents, simple and honest as they were, would probably accept without questioning too much, especially when they saw the deed to the house, when they knew they finally had security, stability. And what about you? I asked, suddenly realizing that Thomas was also in a difficult position. Your father. My father and I always had a complicated relationship, he replied with a sad smile. This doesn't change things much. I'll go back to Richmond, continue my medical studies. Maybe I'll never come back to this plantation. I felt a pang of guilt. Because of me, he had confronted his father, maybe permanently broken with his family. Don't blame yourself, he said, again guessing my thoughts. I did what was right, what I should have done a long time ago. You just gave me the courage that was lacking. At that moment, I felt a deep connection with Thomas. Not romantic, but a bond forged by shared experiences, by similar scars, by a mutual understanding that few people could have. Thank you, I said simply, the words inadequate to express the depth of my gratitude for everything. He smiled, that gentle smile that had been my first clue that he was different from his father. Don't thank me, Clara. Just live. Live fully, freely. That's all I ask. In the days that followed, my life changed completely. I visited my parents, told them an edited version of events, that Mr. Alexander had recognized my work with generous compensation, that he was giving me the opportunity to follow my own path. They were surprised, of course, but also immensely happy. The house of their own, the financial security, these were dreams they had never dared to have, gifts they accepted with tears of gratitude. You were always special, my daughter, my mother said, holding my hands between hers, calloused and wrinkled. I always knew you'd do something great in life. If she knew the price I had paid for those gifts, she would be horrified. But I decided she would never know, that I would carry that burden alone, sparing them the pain, the guilt they would certainly feel if they knew the truth. As for me, I decided to leave North Carolina completely. There were too many painful memories there, too many ghosts. I needed a new beginning, in a place where no one knew me, where I could build a new identity beyond the Whitmore employee. I chose Atlanta, big enough to get lost in, close enough to visit my parents regularly. Thomas helped me with the preparations, using his contacts in the Georgia Capitol to find a small apartment, to guide me on how to open a bank account, how to manage the money I now possessed. In July 1961, I said goodbye to my parents, promising to visit them frequently, and boarded the bus to Atlanta, carrying only 2 suitcases with clothes and a few personal belongings. Thomas accompanied me to the bus station, a final gesture of support before our paths separated. We'll stay in touch, he promised, squeezing my hands in his. If you need anything, at any time, know that you can count on me. I believed him, in that sincere promise of friendship and support. But I also knew that we both needed to move forward, build separate lives, free from the shadows of the past. The bus departed, taking me away from Tobacco Valley, from the big house, from Mr. Alexander, from everything that had happened in the last 2 years. Through the window, I watched the familiar landscape gradually disappear, replaced by unknown territories, by unexplored possibilities. I arrived in Atlanta on a rainy winter afternoon. The city was bigger, colder, and grayer than any I had known. The tall buildings, the wide streets, the constant movement of people, everything was strange, intimidating, but also strangely liberating. There, I was nobody. Just another young woman arriving in the big city, seeking her place in the world. My small apartment was in the Virginia Highland neighborhood, modest but clean, with a living room, a bedroom, a small but functional kitchen. I furnished it with the essentials, keeping everything simple, practical. I didn't want luxury. I didn't want ostentation. I just wanted a space that was mine, truly mine, where I could close the door and feel safe. In the first weeks, I dedicated myself to exploring the city, getting to know my neighborhood, establishing a routine. I visited the local market, walked through the parks when the weather allowed, gradually creating a new normalcy for myself. And then, when I already felt more settled, I began to think about the future. What would I do? How would I make a living? I had enough money to live comfortably for a few years, but I knew I needed a purpose, an occupation that would give me not just sustenance, but meaning. The answer came unexpectedly during a visit to a farmer's market in downtown Atlanta. There, among the colorful stalls, I found an elderly lady selling homemade sweets, cakes, pies, jams that instantly reminded me of my childhood in Alabama, of the sweets my mother made to sell at the Sunday market. I stopped to buy a slice of cornbread and ended up having a long conversation with Mrs. Louise, the stall owner. She was 70 years old, widowed, and maintained the small business more for pleasure than necessity. "But these old bones can't handle getting up at dawn to bake cakes anymore," she confessed with a tired sigh. "Soon, I'll have to stop." At that moment, an idea began to form in my mind. I knew how to cook. I had learned from my mother, perfected my skills at the big house. Why not use this talent to build something of my own? "What if I helped?" I suggested impulsively. "I could learn your recipes, work with you for a while." Mrs. Louise studied me with astute eyes, evaluating me with the wisdom of someone who had seen much of life. "You cook, girl?" "Yes, ma'am. I was a cook for almost 2 years." "And why aren't you cooking now?" I hesitated, uncertain about how much to reveal. "I needed to change my life, start over." Something in my expression must have touched Mrs. Louise because her gaze softened. "We all have stories, don't we? Things we leave behind." I nodded, grateful for her understanding, for not pressing for details I wasn't ready to share. "Come to my house tomorrow," she said finally, writing the address on a piece of paper. "Let's see what you can do. If you're really good, maybe we can work together for a while. Later, who knows?" That's how my new life in Atlanta began. Working with Mrs. Louise, learning her traditional recipes, adapting them with touches of my own Southern heritage. Gradually, our sweets began to gain a reputation at the market, attracting regular customers who appreciated the unique mix of flavors we offered. 6 months later, when Mrs. Louise finally decided to retire, she offered me the opportunity to buy her small business. It wasn't just the market stall, but also the equipment, the recipes carefully noted in worn notebooks, the loyal clientele she had built over the years. "You have talent, Clara," she said, with that direct frankness I had learned to value. "And you have heart. You'll take this forward better than I could hope." With part of the money I had received from Mr. Alexander, I bought Mrs. Louise's business. It wasn't just a commercial transaction, but a passing of the torch, a vote of confidence that moved me deeply. In the years that followed, I gradually expanded the small business. From the market stall, I moved to a small store in the Sweet Auburn Market, where I sold not just sweets, but also savory dishes, Southern specialties that became popular among Atlantans, eager for new flavors. I called the establishment Clara's Kitchen, a simple name that for me represented much more than a business. It was an affirmation of my identity, my independence, my ability to create something positive from suffering. In 1965, I met Robert, a math teacher who became a regular customer at my restaurant. He was a quiet, gentle man, with sharp intelligence and a subtle sense of humor that gradually captivated me. We started as friends, talking about books, music, the city we had both adopted as home. The romance developed slowly, respectfully. Robert never pressured, never demanded, always allowing me to set the pace, the boundaries. When I finally told him fragments of my past, not everything, I could never tell everything to anyone, he listened with compassion, without judgment. "What happened to you is terrible, Clara," he said, holding my hands with a gentleness that almost made me cry. "But it's not who you are. It's something that happened to you, not something that defines you." We married in 1967, in a simple civil ceremony, followed by a lunch for close friends and family at my restaurant. My parents came from North Carolina, radiant with happiness to see their daughter finally finding peace, the stability they had always wanted for me. Thomas also came, a surprise that deeply moved me. He was in his last year of medicine, about to graduate, with plans to specialize in psychiatry. "I want to help people who have been through trauma," he explained when I asked about his choice. "People like you, like my mother." I had never mentioned Thomas to Robert, not because I wanted to hide something, but because that part of my story was too difficult to revisit. Seeing them talking animatedly during the reception, Robert genuinely interested in Thomas's medical career, Thomas clearly approving of the man I had chosen, was one of the most surreal and gratifying moments of my life. In 1968, we had our first child, Richard. Holding that little being in my arms, feeling his warmth, his weight, his complete dependence on me, was a transformative experience. For the first time, I fully understood the meaning of unconditional love, of true responsibility. Richard's birth also brought to the surface fears I didn't know I still carried. What if I wasn't able to protect him? What if the world caused him the same kind of pain it had caused me? What if the ghosts of my past somehow affected him? Robert, with his infinite patience, helped me work through these fears, find a balance between protection and freedom. "We can't isolate him from the world," he would say when he caught me being overprotective. "We can only love him, educate him, and trust that it will be enough." In 1970, we expanded the business again, opening a larger restaurant in the Buckhead neighborhood, focused on regional American cuisine. Flavors of America, we called it, a celebration of our country's gastronomic diversity. Robert left teaching to manage the restaurant with me, forming a partnership that combined my culinary talent with his sense of organization and numbers. Our daughter Mary was born in 1972, completing our family. She was a lively, curious girl, so different from her more introspective, calmer brother. Together they formed a perfect balance, filling our house with laughter, mischief, daily learning. In the years that followed, we built a life that, in my darkest moments at the big house, I would never have dared to dream. A life of honest work, genuine love, small daily joys that, added together, created a deep and lasting happiness. Occasionally, I received news from Tobacco Valley through letters from my parents. Mr. Alexander continued powerful, feared, respected on the surface. Thomas rarely returned to the plantation, having built his own life in Richmond, where he became a respected psychiatrist, specialized in trauma. In 1978, I received news of my father's death. It was a hard blow, even though it was expected due to his fragile health in recent years. I returned to North Carolina for the funeral, the first time I had set foot on that land since my departure 17 years earlier. The city had changed, grown, modernized, but the shadow of the big house still hung over it, visible on the horizon, reminding everyone who really held local power. During the wake, I stayed close to my mother, surrounded by my husband and children, finding comfort in the family we had built. It was when I noticed a familiar figure discreetly entering the small chapel. Thomas, older, more mature, but with the same gentle eyes that had been my salvation so many years ago. Our reunion was brief, emotional. He had come especially for the funeral, knowing how important my father had been to me. "How are you?" he asked, the simple question carrying the weight of everything we had shared. "Well," I replied, and for the first time in a long time, I realized it was true. Not just surviving, not just dealing, but genuinely well. "And you?" "Also," he said with a small smile. "Also." It was the last time I saw Thomas personally, although we maintained sporadic contact through letters over the years. He never married, dedicating himself entirely to his